There comes a moment when you must awaken from the trance of environments that drain your spirit. When the noise, manipulation, and hidden hostility around you no longer feel like home. You begin to sense that what surrounds you is shaping your inner world, molding your thoughts, and muting your truth. This awareness is the first act of liberation. Every environment you inhabit carries an energy, subtle yet powerful, that either nourishes or erodes your sense of self. Destructive spaces feed on conformity. They thrive when you abandon your inner voice in exchange for belonging. The danger lies not in their existence, but in the gradual forgetting of who you are while surviving within them. You may have been taught to endure, to stay silent, to adapt, but silence in the face of toxicity is not peace, it is slow erosion. Your soul begins to whisper through exhaustion, anxiety, and restlessness, reminding you that what diminishes your spirit is not meant to be your home. Listening to that whisper is not rebellion, it is remembrance. Reclaiming your power means no longer negotiating your worth with chaos. It means stepping out of roles that demand self-betrayal. It means refusing to internalize the dysfunction around you as your identity. The moment you decide to stop shrinking to fit an unhealthy space, you realign with your true strength. Freedom does not always arrive as comfort. Sometimes it appears as solitude, the sacred silence after the storm of false belonging. But within that silence, your essence begins to breathe again. You rediscover your own rhythm, your clarity, your light. What once felt like loss becomes renewal, the rebirth of authenticity. There comes a quiet moment in life when the world around you begins to feel heavier than it once did. Conversations that used to feel natural now seem hollow. The laughter around you echoes strangely, and even the places you once called home carry a weight of expectation, of subtle tension, of something unspoken that presses against your chest. At first, you may dismiss it, telling yourself that this is normal, that everyone carries burdens, that adaptation is the way of life. But deep within, something stirs, a gentle insistence that what surrounds you is shaping not only your days, but the very contours of your soul. The first step in reclaiming your power is awakening to this awareness, recognizing the quiet ways in which environments suppress your spirit and mold you into someone you are not. To awaken is not simply to notice the external, it is to feel the subtle erosion of your own authenticity. Toxicity rarely announces itself with fanfare. It seeps through constant compromises, through the small ways you begin to censor your thoughts and temper your voice. Perhaps it is in the polite silences you force, when disagreement arises, the careful shaping of your expression to avoid friction, the subtle internalization of judgments that are not your own. These are not dramatic acts, yet cumulatively they corrode the essence of who you are. Your spirit, once vibrant and spontaneous, learns to shrink. Your heart, once expansive, learns to protect itself by dulling. Awakening to this reality is the first act of reclamation, a conscious recognition that you are not merely enduring life, but being shaped by forces that do not honor your wholeness. Awareness requires courage because it confronts you with uncomfortable truths. You may realize that some of the people, places, or routines you have accepted as familiar are not allies of your growth. You may feel the sting of betrayal, not necessarily from overt cruelty, but from the subtle, persistent absence of nourishment. It is the realization that the world you inhabit has quietly demanded that you compromise the integrity of your inner self in order to belong, in order to survive. This recognition can provoke resistance, guilt, or shame, for we are often taught that accommodation and endurance are virtues. That self-sacrifice is noble, yet enduring at the cost of your soul is not virtue, it is a slow erasure of the self. Awakening, then, is a reclaiming of the right to exist in your own terms, a defiance against environments that thrive on your diminishment. To truly awaken, one must develop a deep attunement to the subtle signals within the body and mind. Anxiety, exhaustion, recurring dissatisfaction, a sense of disconnection. These are not mere inconveniences. They are the soul speaking in the language of sensation. They are reminders that your environment has been shaping you in ways that are misaligned with your inner truth. Awareness grows as you pause, reflect, and listen. It requires cultivating inner stillness in a world designed for distraction. It is noticing the patterns, the repeated dynamics, the invisible pressures that guide your choices unconsciously. Awareness is both a mirror and a map, a mirror reflecting the hidden ways you have been molded, and a map pointing toward the possibility of reclaiming your autonomy. This awakening is the beginning of a profound transformation, for when you recognize the forces that suppress your spirit, you gain the power to choose differently. You no longer move through life merely reacting to circumstance or adapting to external expectation. Instead, you begin to see the boundaries of your influence, the areas where surrender is healthy, and the spaces where resistance is necessary. Awareness becomes both armor and compass, allowing you to navigate environments consciously, to reclaim your voice, your desires, and your sense of self. The world may continue to press, to demand, to distract, yet within this awakening resides an inner sovereignty that no external force can erase. Every space we inhabit, every circle we move within, carries a subtle energy, a resonance that penetrates beyond what the eyes can see or the ears can hear. It is not merely the physicality of walls, rooms, or landscapes that shapes our experience, but the invisible currents of emotion, expectation, and intention that flow through them. Some environments radiate warmth, encouragement, and possibility. Others exude tension, criticism, and subtle hostility. To understand the energy of our surroundings is to awaken to the profound truth that the outer world does not simply exist independently of us. It entwines with our inner state, influencing moods, thoughts, and even the trajectory of our lives. When we enter a space, we absorb far more than we realize. The laughter, arguments, hurried footsteps, unspoken judgments, and unacknowledged grievances all weave themselves into the fabric of our consciousness. In nurturing spaces, the effect is gentle and restorative. Here, creativity blooms, confidence strengthens, and the self feels seen and safe. Even silence carries a kind of affirmation, a steady pulse that says it is acceptable to be fully present, to breathe deeply, to unfold without fear. Growth happens almost imperceptibly, like water nourishing roots underground, and we leave these places renewed, carrying forward a clarity and vitality that aligns with our essence. Conversely, some environments breed decay. They do so not always through overt aggression or cruelty, but through the slow, persistent erosion of spirit. Environments dominated by envy, resentment, manipulation, or indifference leave traces in the mind and body long after we depart. They condition us to shrink, to censor, to doubt our own instincts. The decay is subtle, a creeping anxiety that tells us we are never enough, an incessant tension that makes rest impossible, a dulling of ambition that convinces us to accept less than we deserve. Over time, the self begins to internalize the rhythm of these spaces, absorbing their toxicity as if it were natural, until vitality and clarity feel foreign. The influence of environment is compounded by our attachment and duration within it. The longer we inhabit a toxic space, the more it becomes intertwined with our identity. A destructive workplace may convince us that stress is a necessary part of being capable. A family dynamic dominated by criticism may lead us to measure self-worth through external approval. Cities, neighborhoods, and communities carry energies that seep into consciousness, shaping attitudes, fears, and desires without our explicit awareness. Recognizing the impact of these energies is essential because we often mistake our conditioned responses for intrinsic truth. Anxiety, dissatisfaction, and malaise are not always personal failures. Sometimes they are the reflection of the currents surrounding us. Awareness of environmental energy also offers a path to intentional living. By observing the subtle effects spaces have on our thoughts and emotions, we begin to make choices that honor the self. We seek environments that resonate with growth, creativity, and freedom, and we establish boundaries around those that do not. This is not merely a physical relocation, it is a conscious attunement to energy, a recognition that presence matters and that the soul absorbs its surroundings. To live in alignment with this understanding is to reclaim agency, to refuse passive absorption of decay and instead cultivate spaces that nourish, inspire, and reflect the inner world we wish to inhabit. The energy of environments is thus a mirror and a guide. It reflects the health of our surroundings back to us, reveals patterns we may have ignored, and illuminates the choices we can make to align with life rather than succumb to erosion. It reminds us that while we cannot always control every external factor, we can choose what to allow in, what to nurture, and where to root ourselves. Awareness transforms passive existence into conscious cultivation, and in this recognition lies the subtle but profound power to shape not only the world we inhabit, but the state of the self that moves through it. There is a story told quietly in the human spirit, one that celebrates endurance as virtue, that teaches us to bear the unbearable, to tolerate the intolerable, and to smile while carrying weights that crush the soul. From a young age, we are instructed that resilience is measured by how much we can absorb without complaint, that strength lies in silent suffering. Yet within this lesson lies a subtle deception, the illusion of endurance. To endure toxicity without acknowledgement or action is not a testament to fortitude. It is a slow erosion of the self, a corrosion that leaves the spirit fragile and the heart muted. Toxicity rarely announces itself as a storm. It is a persistent drizzle, seeping into the corners of your life unnoticed. It manifests as offended criticisms, subtle manipulations, emotional neglect, unspoken demands, or the invisible expectation to conform at the cost of your own truth. In such spaces, endurance feels natural because adaptation is necessary for survival. You convince yourself that tolerance is strength, that silence is maturity, that absorbing the environment's weight is proof of your capacity. Yet each act of unacknowledged submission chips away at authenticity, leaving behind a hollowed version of yourself that is skilled at appeasing others, but increasingly disconnected from your own essence. The danger of silent endurance is its invisibility. Unlike open conflict, which provokes immediate awareness and action, slow erosion moves quietly, disguised as responsibility, duty, or love. You may not even notice the loss until you feel an emptiness you cannot name, a heaviness that colors every thought, a subtle anxiety that refuses to dissipate. Your instincts, once vibrant and trustworthy, grow faint. The boundaries that once protected you blur and crumble, and you begin to accept as normal the very conditions that suppress your spirit. In this way, endurance is not a shield but a veil, obscuring the harm being done to your inner world. Recognizing the illusion of endurance requires courage and honesty. It is an awakening to the truth that tolerance does not always equal virtue, and that strength is not synonymous with silent suffering. True strength is the capacity to perceive when an environment erodes rather than nourishes, when compromise becomes self-betrayal rather than negotiation. It is the courage to acknowledge discomfort and to honor the messages your body and soul convey. The tightness in your chest, the restlessness in your mind, the creeping sense that something vital has been lost. These are not signs of weakness. They are the soul's way of signaling that endurance has crossed the boundary into harm. Breaking free from this illusion does not always mean confrontation or dramatic upheaval. Often it begins with small acts of self-recognition, naming the harm, setting quiet boundaries, reclaiming moments of joy, refusing to internalize blame for circumstances beyond your control. It is a process of conscious presence, of noticing how environments shape your mood, your thoughts, your capacity to dream. By turning awareness inward, you reclaim authority over your inner life, refusing to allow silence to be mistaken for strength and endurance to be mistaken for virtue. Ultimately, the illusion of endurance teaches a profound lesson. Strength is not the ability to bear endlessly, but the ability to discern wisely. It is the recognition that the self is sacred, that energy and vitality are finite, and that survival at the cost of the soul is not survival at all. To awaken to this truth is to begin reclaiming your power, to choose presence over passivity, and to understand that honoring yourself is the truest measure of strength. Endurance may seem noble, but when it disguises harm, it is a slow and silent theft of life, and only the courage to see clearly can restore what has been quietly taken. There comes a moment when the weight of external judgment, expectation, and criticism becomes unbearable, when the voices of others, subtle or overt, echo louder than your own. For too long you may have sought validation from those who diminish you, who measure your worth against their own fears, insecurities, or agendas. You may have shaped yourself to fit into molds that were never yours, suppressing instincts, desires, and truths in exchange for fleeting approval. Reclaiming inner authority begins with the recognition that your value is not determined by the approval of others, and that the true measure of your power lies in the fidelity you maintain to your own essence. To reclaim authority is to stop negotiating your identity with destructive spaces. These are not always overtly toxic. Sometimes they appear as communities, workplaces, or relationships that subtly pressure you to conform, to dim your light, to silence your voice. In these spaces, the demand for compliance may be wrapped in politeness in the guise of care or in cultural expectation, yet the cost of adaptation is high. Every compromise chips away at your authenticity. Every act of self-negation reinforces the idea that your inner guidance is secondary to external approval. Reclaiming authority means noticing these patterns, understanding their impact, and choosing consciously to no longer surrender your power to them. The exercise of inner authority requires courage, because it often involves standing alone. It asks that you trust the guidance of your own spirit over the seductive chorus of societal, familial, or peer expectations. It asks that you honor your instincts, acknowledge your feelings, and articulate your boundaries even when doing so threatens comfort or acceptance. This is not rebellion for its own sake, nor is it arrogance. It is the reclamation of the self as a sovereign entity, capable of discerning what nourishes and what diminishes, what aligns with growth and what erodes integrity. Authority begins as an inward commitment, a pledge to honor your own voice, even when it trembles under pressure. Reasserting the power of self-definition is an act of both clarity and liberation. When you stop seeking validation externally, the criteria for your worth shift from the unstable and often destructive opinions of others to the enduring truth of your own experience. You learn to measure your actions by alignment with inner values rather than by applause or acceptance. This reorientation cultivates a profound sense of freedom, for no longer are you bound by the need to explain, defend, or justify yourself to those whose perceptions are incapable of holding the fullness of who you are. Your life becomes a canvas painted by your own hand, rather than a reflection of the judgments imposed upon you. Reclaiming authority also reshapes relationships. Once you no longer seek validation, interactions become voluntary rather than transactional. You attract people who resonate with your authenticity, who mirror your strength rather than demand conformity. At the same time, you are freed from the invisible chains of manipulation, criticism, and coercion, recognizing that the approval of those who seek to diminish you is neither necessary nor deserved. Power is not asserted through dominance over others, but through fidelity to the self, through the quiet insistence that your truth matters and that it cannot be bargained away. Ultimately, reclaiming inner authority is a transformative act of self-respect. It is a conscious refusal to let external forces dictate the shape of your life, an embrace of sovereignty over your mind, emotions, and choices. It is a deep recognition that authenticity is not negotiable and that the courage to trust oneself is the foundation of every meaningful existence. In this reclamation lies a profound awakening, the understanding that power is not taken from the world, but remembered from within, and that by reclaiming it, you restore the life, clarity, and dignity that were always your birthright. Solitude is often misunderstood, confused with loneliness or isolation, and yet it is one of the most profound catalysts for transformation. To step into solitude is to step away from the external noise, the endless expectations, and the invisible pressures that constantly shape and mold us. It is a deliberate turning inward, a conscious choice to inhabit the space where the self can be seen without distortion, where clarity arises unmediated by the judgments and distractions of others. In solitude, the mind, heart, and spirit are no longer negotiating with the world. They are free to breathe, to reflect, and to realign with the essence of what is true. In environments filled with noise and demand, our authentic voice is often the first casualty. Opinions, criticism, and social pressures create a subtle compulsion to conform, to wear masks, to bend and twist the self to fit molds that are not our own. Over time, this can lead to confusion, inner conflict, and the sense that one is living a life dictated by circumstance rather than choice. Solitude acts as a crucible, a transformative space in which the layers accumulated through external influence can be set aside. In this silence, the distortions fade, and the self is able to remember its natural rhythm, its authentic desires, and its innate wisdom. The transformative power of solitude lies not in mere absence from others, but in the conscious engagement with one's inner world. It is a space in which thought, feeling, and intuition can coexist without interference. When external validation is removed, the self is faced with its raw truths, the patterns it has inherited, the compromises it has accepted, and the aspirations that have been quietly suppressed. This encounter can be uncomfortable, for the self may discover areas of stagnation, fear, or unresolved tension that were masked by distraction and social noise. Yet this discomfort is precisely the alchemy of transformation. It illuminates what has been hidden, clarifies what has been distorted, and opens the door to authenticity that has long been deferred. Solitude also restores clarity by creating a mirror for reflection. In the quiet, one begins to distinguish between what belongs to the self and what has been borrowed from others. Decisions can be made not from obligation or fear, but from understanding and intention. Emotions, once entangled with external influence, become clear and intelligible, revealing needs, boundaries, and desires that may have been neglected. Even the body speaks more clearly in solitude, signaling fatigue, tension, and vitality in ways that can be easily ignored in the bustle of external life. In this space, the self reclaims its sovereignty, reaffirming the principles, boundaries, and rhythms that sustain it. Transformation through solitude is not a rejection of connection, but a preparation for it. When the self is restored, when authenticity is reclaimed, relationships and interactions are no longer transactions designed to maintain approval or avoid conflict. They become encounters rooted in clarity, presence, and integrity. Solitude equips the individual with the capacity to engage with the world from a place of wholeness rather than need, fear, or depletion. It is the quiet forge in which resilience, clarity, and self-knowledge are tempered, readying one to navigate the world with discernment and grace. Ultimately, embracing solitude is an act of courage and self-respect. It is the conscious choice to honor one's own inner life, to step back from external noise, and allow the self to emerge in its truest form. In this sacred space, authenticity is restored, clarity emerges, and the soul is given permission to breathe fully. Solitude becomes not a retreat, but a reclamation, the reclaiming of power, voice, and vision that are essential to living with integrity, presence, and depth. True power is rarely found in domination, control, or the accumulation of external accolades. It is born in the quiet, yet unyielding alignment of the self with its own essence, in the courage to live according to principles that resonate with the deepest truths of being. Alignment is liberation because it dissolves the subtle bondage of pretense, the invisible chains imposed by expectation, fear, and social conditioning. When your inner life is congruent with your actions, your decisions, and your relationships, you no longer expend energy appeasing the world or contorting to fit the molds of others. Power, in this sense, is not something granted externally. It is remembered, reclaimed, and enacted through integrity and self-honesty. Living in alignment begins with awareness, a deep and uncompromising recognition of who you are, what you value, and what your soul requires to flourish. It demands reflection and discernment, for the currents of daily life constantly invite distraction and compromise. The world is full of voices and images that promise security, acceptance, or achievement in exchange for conformity, yet the cost is subtle, a slow estrangement from self. In such moments, alignment requires vigilance, a constant attunement to the internal compass that signals whether your choices nurture or diminish your essence. It is the quiet insistence that life be measured not by convenience or popularity, but by fidelity to your own truth. Integrity is the bridge between awareness and liberation. To live with integrity is to honor your inner convictions, even when external pressures demand otherwise, to speak and act in ways that reflect your values, and to refuse the compromises that erode the self over time. This does not imply rigidity or isolation. Rather, it is a disciplined engagement with life in which every interaction and decision is filtered through the lens of self-respect. When actions are aligned with the internal self, energy flows unimpeded, clarity emerges, and the subtle anxieties of pretense and fear are replaced by confidence rooted not in external validation, but in the recognition of one's own wholeness. Alignment also reshapes the way the world responds to you. When you operate from authenticity, boundaries are clear, relationships are grounded in respect, and influence arises naturally without coercion or manipulation. You no longer expend effort in maintaining appearances or securing approval, for your power rests in the constancy of self-trust. Environments and individuals either resonate with your frequency or fall away, and in this discernment, freedom is born. You begin to see that liberation is not about escaping the world, but about moving through it with sovereignty, choosing where to invest attention, energy, and devotion. Self-honesty is the cornerstone of this liberation. To confront your fears, desires, and limitations with clarity is to engage in an intimate dialogue with the self, recognizing both shadow and light. It is an acknowledgement that transformation is ongoing, that alignment is not a static achievement, but a daily practice of recalibration. Each moment of choice becomes an opportunity to reaffirm your essence, to act in ways that reinforce inner strength rather than deplete it. In this disciplined honesty, the self becomes a consistent force, unwavering amidst the turbulence of circumstance and opinion. Ultimately, Alignment is the pathway to a life of profound freedom. It dissolves the internal dissonance that arises from living in contradiction to one's core, replacing it with clarity, vitality, and purpose. By shaping your world through integrity, self-honesty, and conscious action, you reclaim a power that cannot be taken by circumstance or diminished by opinion. Liberation is not granted by others. It is cultivated, remembered, and enacted through the disciplined, courageous choice to live wholly as yourself. And so, the path to reclaiming your power is neither sudden nor simple. It is a journey inward, a careful peeling away of what does not belong, a courageous facing of truth, and a steadfast commitment to live in alignment with your essence. Every step taken toward awareness, every boundary honored, every moment of solitude embraced, and every choice made from authenticity strengthens the foundation of your inner authority. In this reclamation, you discover that freedom is not found by changing the world around you, but by transforming the world within, by becoming a presence that is unshakable, luminous, and whole. Remember, the environments that once drained you do not define you. The voices that sought to diminish you do not measure you. Your power has always existed, waiting patiently within, whispering through intuition, through desire, through the quiet insistence that you are meant to live fully and wholly. To reclaim it is to remember that you are the sovereign of your inner life, the author of your story, and the guardian of your truth. Step into that authority. Step into that clarity. Step into the freedom that comes when the self, fully awake, finally rises. Your power is yours to claim, not tomorrow, not when conditions are perfect, but now in this moment of awakening. Let it guide your choices, illuminate your path, and shape the world you inhabit, not by force, but by the undeniable presence of a spirit aligned with its own truth. Stand, breathe, and remember who you are. For when you do, nothing external can diminish the sovereignty of a soul that has reclaimed itself.